Well, I'm on the ride that I did last week on my hardtail. I'm doing it today on the full suspension Ghost, and the weather couldn't be much better. It's so much easier. It was raining, chucking it down, breezy. It wasn't cold, but it certainly was a lot wetter than today. The track is loose gravel going uphill for about 2 miles, and then it starts to curve downhill all the way back to Burrator Reservoir from whence I started. So let's see what today will hold. It certainly won't be as wet. Right, video number 2. I've also decided to just talk a little bit about the geology of Dartmoor here in Devon. And what you can see here, the tors of Devon stretching off into the distance, are all the remaining stumps left over from the igneous intrusions that happened millions of years ago from a deep-seated source of magma that rose up called a batholith, and it rises to the surface and then it cools without actually coming out onto the surface. It cools underground, and therefore it cools quite slowly, and the minerals that are shown in the rocks are granites, formed granites, and some of the crystals get very, very big because they're allowed to cool very slowly, and that's when they grow. So the whole floor here is littered with granite, broken up into chunks of quartz and feldspar, biotite. If you look up granite constitution, you'll find out all the minerals that are in it, and it gives it a nice speckled colour. But this is, I think, called shapped granite. Shapped granite means that it's got an even bigger selection of crystals. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a crystal there about 1 inch long, which is, you know, quite unusual when you're looking at crystals which are maybe 1 millimetre. So shapped granite is these great big minerals. So the whole of Dartmoor is built on this batholith that's now been eroded down. Also, what I'm experimenting with today is the difference between hardtail and full suspension, but also the size of the discs and rotors on the mountain bike, because my hardtail's got 180 at the front and 160 at the rear, and this is my full suspension, which comes with a 203mm at the front and 180 at the rear. So much more braking surfaces, which are not supposed to heat up as much and deform and all that, and therefore your braking power stays on its peak form for the whole ride. So going down on the other side of this ride, once I've got to the top and over the moors, that should come into its own. So I'll test it and see if, to the amateur rider, whether that makes any difference or not. Okay, first report on the issue of hardtail or full suspension. Many arguments, but I've came up on this on the hardtail last week, and it's quite rough, quite, you know, strewn with rocks that you could easily, you know, catch your wheel on. Quite tricky to navigate through some of it. On the hardtail I had to get off quite a lot, but on the full suspension I've noticed today I've probably been able to cycle up it about 40% more. So I've cycled much of that uphill, which isn't too bad at all. So fingers crossed, more to come later. Right, on the geology side of things, you can see in the distance there the peak of the tor sticking up. Now that was formed when it was underground, when the earth actually had another mile or so of thick sediment and rock on top of this layer here, and erosion has brought that layer down, down, down until it meets the batholith, the underground chamber of solidified granite that's tough. And as the rocks around it disappear and erode, it leaves the peaks of the granite sticking up, because that's a very resistant rock to weathering now, and that's been there for millions of years. It does weather eventually, but in the meantime it leaves the peaks sticking up in the air. A few more million years time and that will have been reduced to rubble as well, but for now we have the Tors of Dartmoor. Okay, so that's most of the uphill done. I've reached the kind of plateau point on top of the moors where there's really nothing, no features to note. So I can reflect on that climb. I can definitely say, now there's a lot of factors involved, but I can definitely say I rode most of the way up that uphill, and on the hardtail I didn't. It was more skittish over the rocks. As it hit them, it kind of went one way or the other and the rock flipped over. The same thing happened on the full suspension, but the suspension on the back and just the larger suspension on the front seemed to soak it up more and keep you on the bike longer. Now I must say, just to let you know, the hardtail that I'm talking about is a white 905 Enduro hardtail, and it has 27.5 inch wheels and the same tyres as this, which is also 27.5 Ardent. 2.4 on both bikes, back and front. So in terms of the wheel size and the tyres, there's no difference there to make a difference, but certainly wasn't skidding quite so much. And it is quite wet, although it isn't as wet as it was. It's still a wet day. So far I would say the full suspension is better if you can get it light enough to climb and stay mounted. Right, the wind is strong, so I'm going to have to shout, but I'm about a mile out of Princetown, which is just through there if you follow the path along and down over the other side, about a mile. So this is one of the highest points of Dartmoor. You can see quite a distance in all directions. So I've come from this direction over here. In the valleys there is Burrator Reservoir, where I parked the car right next to the reservoir. So if you want to do this ride, you just park next to the road on the edge of the reservoir and cross the bridge and go round the lake in an anti-clockwise manner until you find Sheep's Tor, and then you just follow the path. But as we were saying earlier, this is the Tors, and you see how they really stick up above the landscape, but they weather physically and chemically. And the chemical way is called exfoliation, a bit like when you exfoliate your skin. So it peels off due to the weathering, and the cracks open up and the silicon dissolves, and it opens up these cracks wider and wider until they peel off. So you'll find that in many areas of the country, like the Lake Districts in Yorkshire, the dry stone walling is made by experts that can chip off bits of rock and fit them neatly into little grooves. But here, because the rock itself is granite and it exfoliates into these blocks, the walls are just made of these blocks. They don't really need to chip them off. They just make it out of the fallen blocks from the Tors. You can see here more clearly how they don't actually carve the rocks, they just use ones that fit just right. And now we're heading down the path a quarter of a mile to Princetown, which is right in the centre of Dartmoor. It's notorious for having the prison. I don't know if you can see the prison there, a great big grey building just to the right of those conifers, where some of Napoleon's men were kept in the Napoleonic Wars when they were captured. Onward to Princetown for a bite of a pasty or two. Here we are in Princetown. They're mowing the lawn as we speak. Nothing else much happens in Princetown, but Princetown stores is always handy. Midway in the ride, we're going off that way, and you can always get a decent pasty en route, which is tasty. Okay, we've just come from Princetown, only a mile out, and I've veered off from the main track, which is over there, just to come up here a quarter of a mile, because this is one of the many granite quarries in Dartmoor. Great big scars in the landscape. They carved out trackways to take it away in mini trains down to Princetown, and the track that we came in on from Princetown is actually one of the train tracks that was laid down to retrieve the quarry material. Now it's all been taken up and made into a shared path, so it's quite easy, that bit. But yeah, they were mammoth quarries. So this part of the track has got loads of mining memorabilia from a time gone by. Lots of spoil heaps, old buildings that have now disused for hundreds of years, all fallen into disrepair. And even the train tracks, even though the wooden sleepers have gone that held the tracks, the actual stones that held the sleepers in place are still there. It's nice out of the wind, sun's come out. One thing I have noticed in the mountain bike side of things for today is that I'm catching the bottom of the crank arm on rocks, and this is different to the hardtail. I don't catch so many rocks with that one. These arms are 175 millimeters, which is standard, but you can get 170 millimeters. It's only 5 millimeters difference, but my hardtail has got the 170. So obviously, as you rotate, this bit is 5 millimeters further off the ground. Also, obviously, with the hardtail, you haven't got the shock. So as I sit on the bike and hit various things with the back wheel, that sends the crank an inch or two lower and magnifies the effect of having the long crank arm, so you do catch yourself on the boulders more. But that's part of the full suspension. Right, another mountain bike observation. I seem to be riding more with this bike than walking because of the usual buttock ache, and I think the bike is making it smoother, which is helping a lot at the back, of course, but I don't think the seat on my white 905 is as comfy as this specialised body geometry one. It's got a much wider padded seat to it. It's probably another centimetre wider overall, and I think that's helping stay in the saddle. So it's not just about suspension and all that, it's how good is your saddle. So I might go and reflect on that and have a look at the white one again and maybe get a new saddle for that bike. Another good thing about this route is that on the other side, going down the opposite side to that I came on from Princetown, you get to certain points, and if I zoom in, it's not coming out very well on here, but when you're here in the flesh, you can see the sea just over the horizon. Well, we've only got a couple of miles left to do, coming back down the valleys into Burrator over that hill there. Again, if you can see it just about, you can manage to see the sea here, and a little town of Walkhampton over there on the right hand side of the trail. So we're kind of doing like a horseshoe shaped ride. Start off on one, go anti-clockwise, come back down the other side, and eventually we'll be coming back down to Burrator. Unfortunately, this isn't really the route to test brakes, because a lot of it's climbing uphill, and then the downhills are very mild, so you don't really get the chance to do an intense test with the brakes. So I haven't really noticed any difference being bigger than the ones on the hardtail, but I'd imagine it will make a difference if you was to test it to extremes. And then as we come down into the valleys, Burrator Reservoir is at the bottom. This is quite an easy bit. You just coast all the way down, zigzagging down the hill until you get back to the car. I think it's about a 14-mile round loop. and it's mixed terrain. Got lots of different things on it, rocky paths like this and really rocky paths with loose scree on it, and then you get some mud and some dry bits, some gravel, some grass. Yeah, it's got a bit of all sorts, so it tests the bike quite well. But like I say, it's not great for downhilling, you know, mental downhilling and braking hard. It just isn't extreme enough for that, but it's a good day out and I would recommend it. But I'll summarise some of the bike stuff in a minute, what I've come to my conclusions about. So what have I learned from today's ride? 1, I love mountain biking. 2, there's a lot of granite in Dartmoor. 3, I think slightly bigger rotors back and front will improve your braking. Even on today's ride I've noticed just a little bit more stopping power on the bigger rotors, and it hasn't been an extreme ride at all. Another thing, these pedals keep hitting the floor with the combination of 175 and the suspension going up and down. You do find that you're having to remember to keep your pedals level a lot more than what you do on the hardtail. Hardtail's only got 170mm shafts, and obviously the back doesn't bounce up and down, so it is better for that. The tyres are good, yeah, the wheel size is good. I think overall this is a more comfortable bike on this mixed terrain, and that might be down to the saddle as well as the suspension, or lack of suspension, whichever you're comparing it with. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong to buy a full suspension or a hardtail. You just take the bike, get both, and take the bike whichever suits that terrain on the day most. But I think if I was to do this ride again, the paths are so rocky and uneven and, you know, gnarly, I think I would probably tend to ride this one 70% of the time and maybe bring the hardtail up here now and again. But definitely smoother, and I feel less tired at the end of that ride, which is the same one I did last week. It's about 14 miles, all off road near enough. So I think neither is wrong. You just choose what you want for the particular ride you're doing. Well, that's me signing off from the Burrator to Princetown loop. See you again.